One thing people don't tell you is if you have chicken, sometimes your eggs end up like summer zucchini squash and you have more than you know what to do with, and friends and family have had enough. So today we're going to talk about how I can take this 8 dozen eggs and preserve them for 25 years plus. Today we're going to be preserving these eggs. I have 8 dozen extra. We give eggs regularly to family, friends. We do sell some of our eggs, and we use eggs on a daily basis here in our household. But I had 8 dozen extra that were ready to have something done with them, so I decided it would be a great opportunity for me to share with you how we preserve our eggs. Our goal is to preserve them in a way that doesn't require refrigeration, that is going to last 25 years plus. So let me get started on showing you what we're going to use today to do that and how we're going to get this done. I've got my blender, my measuring cup, and my trays for my eggs. Now there are a lot of different ways that you can preserve your eggs. We've tried a lot of them and had different results based on what they were. We've tried dehydrating, like scrambled eggs. They're okay, not that great. We have done frozen eggs, cracking the eggs into an ice cube tray, freezing them, or into a muffin tin and freezing them and then popping them out, putting them in the freezer. For me, that takes up too much freezer resource. Plus, I'm trying to get away from doing as much as I can that requires electricity and freezer space, and doing things that I can actually store on my shelf. I know some people out there water glass their eggs, not something that I'm interested in doing. Now you can also like pickle your eggs and put them on a shelf, pickled. Not something, again, that I'm interested in doing for my eggs. I want my eggs to be able to be in a form where if I want to make an omelet, I want to make scrambled eggs, I want to bake, I can take those eggs and easily get them back into a form that's going to allow me to get a good result and doesn't require electricity for me to be able to store them. So I'm going to be doing my eggs in our freeze dryer today. And we have a harvestright freeze dryer, so you'll get to see that when we get the trays down there. But I'm going to start by cracking the eggs into my blender. And as soon as I get the blender full and ready, I'll show you how many I can fit into the blender, and we'll see how many eggs we can fit onto one tray. All right, so I got 2 dozen eggs into the blender. Now, just a quick note that all the eggs that I'm using today have been pre-washed. Normally, I leave my eggs unwashed in the container that I keep them in on the counter, where they will keep for quite a while without having to be refrigerated. Once the eggs are washed, you are going to want to keep them in the refrigerator because you've taken the protective bloom off the outside of the egg. So I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to save you from having to listen to the blender make a lot of noise. And as soon as I'm done washing my hands and blending these up, we'll come back and see if I can fit these 2 dozen eggs onto one tray. All right, so we have these blended up. I'm just using an inexpensive Oster blender. I put it on high and used the feature for beat the eggs and did that for less than a minute. So another thing I wanted to mention, just for anybody who's freaking out about the fact that I cracked the eggs all together into the blender at once, I don't currently have a rooster, so I know none of these eggs are fertilized. And when I washed the eggs, I also did the float test. So any eggs that floated that were potentially bad, I took out and used those for other purposes. So I don't have any eggs in here that I'm worried about being bad eggs. So let's get this poured onto a tray and see if I can get this 2 dozen eggs to fit on that tray. So let's see how full this 2 dozen eggs makes a tray. And it looks like it's going to get fairly full, but we should be able to fit, oh, easily. We fit 2 dozen eggs on 1 tray. So let me get the other 6 dozen eggs that I have already here, done up into the blender and onto the trays, and I'll be back as soon as I have all the trays filled. Well, all 8 dozen eggs have been whipped up and they're onto the trays. We've got 2 dozen eggs per tray, so we have 4 trays filled. We have a 5 tray freeze dryer. So I've taken some of our homemade yogurt and filled this silicone tray. It's like a little mini muffin silicone tray with some of that so that we can freeze dry it and use it to test out how that works as far as using a freeze-dried starter in making our homemade yogurt. Each one of these is about 1/8 of a cup, so if I was making a full batch, if you've seen my yogurt video, I would be using 2 of these cubes for a full batch. Another thing I wanted to just quickly mention is if you have freeze dryer trays and you don't have the freeze dryer tray covers from Harvestright, I would definitely recommend it. In this case, we're going to be putting these trays into our freezer so that we can pre-freeze these before they go into the freeze dryer. Part of that reason is for the video I wanted to show filling the trays. Our freeze dryer is not close to our kitchen, and this being a liquid, we're going to throw them in the freezer long enough to get them solid so that when we carry them to the freeze dryer, we're not going to spill everything everywhere. Now, I could have just brought the trays downstairs, filled them right at the freeze dryer, but it would have been a lot of running up and down stairs, so this was the easiest process for our video. I'll make sure that I leave a link to the freeze dryer covers for anybody interested down in the video description. So let me get these into the freezer, and then when they're ready to go in the freeze dryer, I'll be back. Just wanted to mention, if you haven't seen our videos on how we use eggshells and the different purposes we have for them, I just wanted to make sure you knew these eggshells definitely aren't going to go to waste. I'll be washing them off, we're going to let them dry out, and then I'll be crushing them up to use as a crushed calcium supplement for our chickens. If I have more than I need for that, I will take the crushed shells, powder them, and use them as a calcium supplement in our garden. So time to go get these done while everything else is in the freezer, getting solid enough for us to take it down to the freeze dryer. So I'll be back soon. So we've got our freeze dryer all set and ready. It takes about 15 minutes to get it to temperature. It's just a quick push of the button to get it ready. So now we're going to get this open. And as I said, I've got a tray of our yogurt starters that I'm going to put in, as well as our eggs. Now, we use our freeze dryer all the time, and for anybody who's considering purchasing a freeze dryer, it is an investment. You know, I'm going to be honest about that. However, if you grow a lot of food or want to store a lot of your own food, this is a great option, and ours has more than paid for itself in the time that we've had it. So that's it. Trays are loaded. Close it up. Just click continue. And it's started. So I'll be back with you as soon as this is done, and I'll let you know how long it took to get these freeze dried. They finished drying. It took about 36 hours, and now it's time to get everything off the trays. So my yogurt dried really well, but that's a whole nother project, so I'm going to get that out of the way. The egg also dried really well, and I just used tray separators instead of covers now that it's dry because I don't have to worry about spilling it. But It dried, as you can see, very nicely. Now that this has dried, I'm going to use a spatula, get it off the pan and into my food processor so I can grind it up into a powder. One of the questions I often get is, what is the texture of this like once it's freeze-dried? So I could take this and store it just the way it is. I prefer to put it in my food processor to turn it into a powder to store, but it has a very crystalline structure. It snaps. I know it's completely dry. There's no moisture left to this, and that's the most important part when you're storing anything for long term, is that you make sure all the moisture is out before you get it stored. So I'm going to take this, put it into my food processor, get this all ground into a powder, and then I'll be back when I have that ready. One thing I almost forgot to mention is, before I get this into a powder, I'm only doing one tray at a time. Now, you can do as much as you want all at once, depends how you want to store it and depends on your personal preference. I do it because I want to keep track of how much I'm putting away for storage. Now, let me get this powdered up and we'll be back to show you what it looks like when it's in powder form. So our first 2 dozen eggs are powdered, and I've got a quart jar. I'm using a funnel because I always make a mess, and I'm going to spoon the eggs into this quart jar. Now, I know I'm going to have a lot of space left after this first 2 dozen, so we're going to see how many of our total 8 dozen eggs we can get into this quart jar, and if I have any left over, I'll put them into a Mylar bag for longer term storage. Here's our 2 dozen eggs in our quart jar, and now I'm going to get the other 6 dozen that we have powdered up. I'm going to put those in Mylar bags, and I'll be back in just a minute. So we have our 8 dozen eggs all set and ready to go. Now, if I was going to put this jar on the shelf for long-term storage, I would probably make sure it's completely full. I drop in an oxygen absorber, clean the rim, put on my lid, put on my ring, and when stored properly, just like the Mylar bags, it's going to last 25 years plus. Now, for the Mylar bags, I also have 2 dozen eggs per bag, because that's the way I like to store it. And when I do them in the Mylar bags, I also drop in an oxygen absorber, and then I use my sealer from Harvestright to seal the bags, and then these are put away. Now, these eggs, as I said, will last, when stored properly, 25 years plus. And for me, it's a great way for getting these eggs stored in case something happens and I don't have the opportunity to get eggs in the future. So the eggs that I used are large eggs, and to rehydrate the equivalent of 1 egg, you're going to use 2.5 tablespoons of the powder to 2.5 tablespoons of water. Whip that up and you have the equivalent of 1 scrambled egg. And you can use that to make omelets, eggs, in baking, however you normally would crack, scramble, and use an egg. I also wanted to share with you something that we discovered after we started freeze drying our own eggs. Now, we had bought this jar from a well-known brand of freeze-dried foods before we got our freeze dryer. These are the eggs that we just freeze dried. Now, the color difference is huge, the texture is very different, and so is the taste. They rehydrate the same way, and just to kind of give you an idea, I'm gonna have Steve do a quick rehydrate, scramble up, and show a side-by-side comparison between the two.
Okay, so what I'm gonna do, just to kind of compare the store-bought with the ones that we're freeze drying using our Harvestright freeze dryer. I'm gonna make 2 simple 2-egg omelets, and since this is 2.5 tablespoons per egg, I'm gonna do 5 tablespoons. Or roughly 5. I guess my measurements are kind of realistic because most eggs are all different sizes, so. and the textures are totally different. The brand name is very, very fine. I would kind of compare the texture almost with granulated sugar versus confectionery sugar. But now I'm going to add 5 tablespoons of water to each of these. We'll mix them up and I'll show you what they look like in their raw state before we put them on the grill. Okay, we'll mix this one here up. And it kind of looks like a pudding mix rather than scrambled eggs. Very, very creamy, almost more like a batter than eggs, with a consistency of almost like a crepe batter. Okay, and then these are our eggs. And already they're looking more like eggs. I've still got some chunks in here. Okay. Yeah, and this has got more of an egg-like texture to it. So I'll finish whipping these up and then I'll bring you over to the stove and we'll start frying these eggs up. Okay, kind of forgive the location. I don't know how good the light is or how this is going to turn out. But you can see I'm pouring on that brand name of eggs, and it's almost like pouring, like I said, a crepe or a pancake. It seems more like a batter. And now I'm going to do the ones we just freeze dried right next to it. They're gonna probably bump into each other. That's all right. And we'll get these scrambled up and I'll show you the finished consistency, what they look like, and we'll let you know what they taste like too when it's all finished. Well, you can see a difference already. Like I said, this one looks almost like a pancake, and this one looks like eggs. A little well done, maybe. But since I said I was going to make omelets, it's not an omelet unless you put something in it. So I'm going to add a little bit of cheese and a little bit of salsa. Salsa is great as an omelet filler because it kind of takes the place of onions and tomatoes and peppers all in one shot. The lazy omelet. You know, these are pretty weak omelets, but this is just for taste purposes, just to kind of show the performance between the two. Now the other thing that I've noticed in the past, and we'll see if it happens this time, is whenever I've tried folding the store brand one, it kind of breaks. It's not as pliable. So in here I'll just fold. And I'm going to fold it one more time. Maybe I'll just fold it this way. There we go. And then this one here. Yeah, it just snapped. It's like trying to fold a pancake. So I'm just going to leave this one folded once. Spin this around so you can kind of see how that broke. And this one here folded up nicely. Okay, let me get these plated up, and then me and Marilyn will come back with a taste test. So here they are. Now I don't want to make fun of this too much. It is decent, and you know, before we got our freeze dryer, this is what we used as our powdered egg, and it was probably the best powdered egg that's out there. We're not going to mention what brand it is, but it's a fairly well-known brand of freeze-dried product. But like anything that you grow or raise, if you do it yourself, you're always going to get a better outcome. You know what's in your food, you know how it tastes, and that's why I really recommend, if you're gonna invest in something for food storage, a freeze dryer is probably the best thing that we invested in. It makes a huge difference. But it's one of those things that most people just aren't ready to afford yet. They're fairly expensive, but they do a great job. But now, I guess, let's hear what Marilyn thinks about. She gets the creepy one first, and I get the good one.
All right, so we'll give it a taste test. Like Steve said, it is more the texture of a pancake, a thin pancake, than an egg. The color, this is more orangey than the yellow of the eggs, so we'll give it a taste. It's not bad. If I was stuck in a situation where food was at a premium, this definitely is an option. But I want to try this one.
That tastes like I just cracked a couple of eggs into a pan and made an omelet. And you know, the beauty of this being freeze-dried is she just freeze-dried these over the past couple of days, and they taste like fresh eggs. But I could open that jar of eggs 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and as long as they're stored correctly, they're going to taste exactly the same way. So it really doesn't matter how old something is. If it's stored correctly, if it's preserved and stored correctly, you're going to have a really good ingredient for whatever you're using it for, either on its own or as an ingredient in like baking or something like that.
A difference that I do see between the two, the texture definitely is different as far as, and some people hate this phrase, but as far as mouthfeel goes when you're eating something, this one has a little more grainy texture, I think.
They put an anti-clumping in anything that is packed that's powdery. And I'm not exactly sure what that anti-clumping agent is, but it does, I think, make it into more like a batter. And I'm not saying this tastes bad. It doesn't taste like fresh eggs, but it doesn't taste bad. I mean, I'll eat this all day. But if you're looking for an egg, you just can't beat the freeze-dried one over the store brand freeze-dried eggs.
So we just wanted to share with you the process of freeze-drying eggs for long-term storage, how we do it, what we use, how we store them, and to actually do a side-by-side comparison with what you can buy online. Now, as Steve said, we understand not everybody is going to buy a freeze dryer and freeze dry their own eggs. The online brands are good. They're something that is an investment if it's something that you aren't ready to invest in a freeze dryer yet, and we get that completely. But for those of you who have a freeze dryer or who are thinking about getting a freeze dryer, this, along with doing your herbs and your vegetables, just for us has been a huge step up in our self-reliance and preparedness journey. So we wanted to share all that with you, and we'll make sure that we leave a link for the Harvestright freeze dryer. Now, we have to be right up front. We are Harvestright affiliates. That doesn't cost you any extra money. And we'll make sure that the link that we have gets you right to their site. Quick, easy, convenient. And I believe right now they are, as of the making of this video, they still have their spring sale on, which is a great option. It does help us out if you decide to use our link to purchase one, so thank you if you do decide to do that.
Right.
But if you'd like to see us freeze dry more foods and then do a rehydrate or a comparison, please let us know, and we'd love to do those videos for you. And remember, like, subscribe, share, and until next time, everybody, take care.
See ya.
Sneaky.